Sawadee-kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying the words of the Buddha. We're using this book that's titled Walking the Path with the Buddha. This is part of the Words of the Buddha book series. It's volume 2 because we just restarted this program from the very beginning last week where we studied chapters 1 through 10. You don't need to actually start at the beginning for this program, but it's certainly nice to start at the beginning if you have that opportunity. But today we're going to move into our second class, and we're going to do this similar to last week, where at the end of last week's class, where I invited a student in Zoom to be able to read the chapter. Then I'll share some teachings on that chapter, and then I'll open up to any and all questions that you guys might have as we make our way through this study group. Now remember, if you would like to meditate prior to class, this would be wonderful for you. Even if you get 10, 15, 20 minutes, just a little bit of meditation here and there just before class, this can really help prepare the mind for the class itself. And then if you've read the book before and or after class, this is going to help you as well, so that when we come together, I don't have the ability to teach to the level of detail that I've written in the book, but I teach to a certain level of detail, and then I just see what questions you guys have. So if you've read prior to class, it's going to help you to be able to have certain questions perhaps that you might be interested to ask during the class. And remember, if you haven't studied the chapters at all and you'd like to just come to class, you're more than welcome to do that. Because sometimes you could be a single mom or a single dad or really busy with work, or maybe there's been a death in the family and you just haven't had the opportunity to study the teaching. So you're always welcome to come to class. But the more you prioritize your reading and your meditation and the things like this, you'll just see that the improvement to the condition of the mind just gradually improves. So I'd like to welcome all of you, whether you're joining for the first time, you're joining regularly, no matter where you are in the world, if you're on YouTube, Facebook, or Zoom, welcome to our class today. And as I typically do, I invite students to volunteer to read the chapters. And if you're interested in reading at all, you're always welcome to raise your hand electronically in Zoom, and I'll be able to see that, and then you'll be able to read the individual chapters. And then same thing, if you'd like to ask questions during the class, you can put your questions into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand electronically in Zoom and ask any and all questions that you like. So it looks like Vibhav and Mayuli both volunteered to read, so we'll just take it one at a time. I saw Mayuli's hand first. Mayuli, with this first chapter, what I'm going to do is just kind of have you read a portion of the way, and then I'm going to teach a little bit, and then we're going to read a little bit more and then teach a little bit, because this is a really comprehensive teaching. So as you're reading, just know that I'll kind of pause you here and there to make sure that we have an opportunity to explore the various parts of the teaching. So if you'd like to unmute, you're welcome to, and you're welcome to go ahead and read. And then Vibhav will come to you for chapter 12.
Chapter 11, The Noble Eightfold Path, the way of practice leading to the elimination of discontentedness. And what, monks, is the noble truth of the way of practice leading to the elimination of discontentedness? It is just this noble eightfold path, namely right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. And what, monks, is right view? It is, monks, the wisdom of discontentedness, the wisdom, the cause of discontentedness, the wisdom of the elimination of discontentedness, and the wisdom of the way of practice leading to the elimination of discontentedness. This is called right view. And what, monks, is right intention? The intention of renunciation, the intention of non-ill will, the intention of harmlessness. This, monks, is called right intention.
Okay, I'm going to pause you right here, Mayuli, just for a moment while I share some teachings here. So this is a core central teaching of the Buddha. And in our foundational programs, I go through this inside and out, backwards and forwards, left, right, because you're going to need to understand it in a lot of detail in order to be able to get to enlightenment. It takes me about 2.5 hours, sometimes even 3 hours, depending on the questions, to be able to teach this thoroughly. And in fact, in our group learning program, I split this teaching up into 3 individual classes where I spend essentially an hour and a half in 3 different classes for a total of about 4.5 hours teaching this particular teaching. Because if you're interested in getting to enlightenment, where the mind is peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, where you don't have any discontent feelings like anger, sadness, frustration, and all those others that we talk about, you're going to need to know this in a lot of detail. This is what you're dialing in closer and closer and closer. If you think about a speaker system, and if you were interested in getting a really good quality sound out of these speakers, you would dial in and tweak these 8 dials really closely to get a better and better quality sound out of the speakers. Well, the same thing is true about the mind. You can actually dial this in closer and closer into your life, chipping away at it little by little, and you'll see the condition of your mind gradually improving, and you'll see the condition of your life gradually improving with all your relationships. So I'm just going to kind of go over this in kind of an overview to give you guys a chance to ask any and all questions. And if you haven't studied this with me in any of the foundational programs, they've all been recorded. So you'll be able to explore this in those programs. And even if I have any future ones coming up, which each month I teach the foundational program online, you can attend it live, or you can watch the recordings or listen to the podcast. And it's in the book, in the audiobooks. So if you're going back to volume 1, you would like to explore chapters 4 and 5, and then you can watch the recordings on that too. But let me just kind of go through this in an overview, because you're going to see this teaching in other parts of the program here in the Pali Canon English Study Group. It shows up in multiple books. And normally what I do is I just say, okay, what questions do you guys have? But since this is the first time we're encountering it at the very beginning of this program, then I'm going to just kind of walk through it in kind of an introductory way. So here, as I mentioned, this is a core central teaching of the Buddha where everything else plugs into it. And the very first thing that he's talking about here is right view. This is the very beginning of the path to enlightenment. Anytime the Buddha would have a brand new student, he would help them establish right view. And what he's doing here is he's pointing to the Four Noble Truths, which is what we studied last week. Chapter 7 last week was the Buddha's versions of the Four Noble Truths, where we talked about the problem in the unenlightened mind, the cause of it, the elimination of it, and the path forward. The problem is the discontentedness, the mind going up and down and up and down, having conditioned feelings that if something the mind gets, it gets so happy, excited, elated, but then it experiences sadness or anger or frustration or boredom and loneliness. This is the problem that the Buddha discovered. Then the second noble truth is the cause of discontentedness. This is craving, desire, attachment, the longing, the yearning, the wanting things to be a certain way. That if the mind gets what it wants, it will experience pleasant feelings. Or if it doesn't get what it wants, it gets painful feelings. And remember, you can independently verify this, right? Think about a time where you've recently been angry or frustrated or agitated. There was something you wanted, something your mind was longing and yearning for, something you expected. And if you would have got it that way, you would have been happy. But since the mind didn't get what it wanted, it experienced this anger or frustration or some other discontent feeling. So the cause of discontentedness is craving, desire, attachment, wants, expectations, longing, yearning. But what the mind's going to do with the lack of wisdom is it's going to tend to blame other people for the discontentedness. So perhaps when you've gotten angry in the past or frustrated or annoyed or some other discontent feeling, you might have been looking for someone else to blame. Or you might have pushed people away, or you might have been bitter and harsh and hostile to people, or you might have put your expectations on people. And this is what the mind does when it lacks this wisdom of the element of the cause of discontentedness. So when you understand the cause, that the cause is inside your own mind, it's the longing and the yearning. That's what's causing the discontentedness. It's not anything external that's causing it. Then the third noble truth is the wisdom of the elimination of discontentedness. The way you eliminate discontentedness is you need to eliminate the cause. So if you understand that the cause is craving, desire, attachment, then you need to work to eliminate the cause, which is eliminating craving, desire, attachment. And then the fourth noble truth is the way of practice that leads to the elimination of discontentedness is the Eightfold Path. That's the core central teaching. That's what's going to teach you how to eliminate your craving, desire, attachment. And that's why it's so important to know this very thoroughly. So the Buddha starts off his students establishing right view, where establishing right view is to accept responsibility and be able to see through independent verification that your mind is causing your own discontentedness. And when you see that clearly, then it helps you to go forward with all the rest of the path. Because the next part of the path is right intention. Where what right intention is where you develop the right intention or the thinking or the thought of renunciation, non-ill will, and harmlessness. These are three things that you need to establish in your own mind that you have the intention of renunciation, where you're willing to let go and give things up, like unwholesome things, unwise things, like your false beliefs, one of the first things you need to be willing to let go of is the false belief that other people are causing you to be angry and frustrated. If you continue to hold on to this, you'll never be able to solve your problem. You'll never be able to eliminate discontentedness because you're holding on to this belief that other people are causing you to be discontent. But you're not eliminating your false beliefs and bringing in new beliefs. You're bringing in wisdom. That's why you're learning, examining, investigating the teachings. You're reflecting on them to independently verify them, and you're practicing them. So as you gain this wisdom to be able to see the truth, and your mind's awakening to this wisdom, you need to be willing to practice the intention of renunciation, where you're letting go. And then you need to practice the intention of non-ill will, which is harmlessness. This is where you eliminate anger, hatred, and ill will. And then the intention of harmlessness. So there's this non-ill will and harmlessness. These kind of go together, where the non-ill will is essentially goodwill, practicing the intention of loving kindness. And the intention of harmlessness is where you're disinterested or incapable of causing harm. Because any harm that you put out is just going to come back to you. So as long as you have the opposite of these things, where if you had the intention of ill will in your mind, or if you had the intention of harmfulness, then as you're putting out that anger, hatred, and ill will, and you're putting out the harm, this is all going to just come back to you in your relationships. So if you're argumentative and hostile and bitter, this is what's all going to come back to you as you're putting that out into the world. So the Buddha is starting you off with this wisdom section of the Eightfold Path. This is the first section or category of the Eightfold Path, where you're developing this wisdom of right view and right intention. And then with that understanding that it's your own mind that's causing your own discontentedness, and you have the willingness to let go, the willingness to eliminate your anger, hatred, ill will, and practice goodwill in the intention of harmlessness, where you're disinterested in causing harm. Now he's going to share with you the moral conduct section to be able to improve the way that you interact in the world. Because as long as you're interacting in the world in these harmful ways, this harm is just going to come back to you. Again, there's a lot of details here, but I'm just going to go over it in an introductory way. So as you guys have questions towards the end, just let me know and we'll answer those. And then I highly encourage you to look back to where I teach it in detail. So Mayuli, if you'd like to discuss the next or share the next part, we'll go ahead. Oh, it looks like Vibhav has a question here. I wasn't planning to take questions, but we can go ahead, Vibhav, and take a question for each section. That might be easier for you guys.
Yeah, thank you, Teacher David. I was just wanted to get a little more detail on like the intention of renunciation. I understand we are trying to renunciate all our harmful feelings, unwholesome feelings, not harmful, unwholesome feelings and unwholesome thoughts. And so does the renunciation, the intention of renunciation naturally come about by doing the other part of the Eightfold Path, like mindful, the meditation, and they said the right concentration, right mindfulness? Or is it something that you try to establish on a regular basis by looking at, introspecting at your thoughts and saying, okay, this is unwholesome thought, I need to renunciate it?
Yeah, this is the wisdom section where you're cultivating the wisdom to understand you're going to need to let go. That if you kept doing the same things that you're doing now, you're just going to experience the same results. So there's certain false beliefs, there's certain things that you're holding on to, maybe certain material possessions, maybe certain relationships, maybe the mind's holding on to any number of things like money or relationships or clothing or things like this. And you don't have to get rid of everything. That's not what the path to enlightenment is. But the mind needs to be willing to let go of the craving, desire, attachments where the mind's holding on to these things. And yes, breathing, mindfulness, meditation, and generosity, which is part of the path, will help you to let go. But this section is helping you to build the wisdom that it's going to take for you to be able to let go. And then with the breathing, mindfulness, meditation, and generosity, that's what's training your mind to let go. But here, this is just the wisdom section where you're building the understanding that you're going to need to practice letting go, having an open mind, and you're going to have certain things you're going to need to let go of as you go forward on the path to enlightenment.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so now that we've got right view and right intention set up, where now it's time to start looking at the moral conduct of how to improve. Now that we understand that we need to not cause harm to others, the Buddha is going to share with you some basic guidance here in the Eightfold Path about how to not cause harm through your moral conduct. And then he has other teachings that you're going to learn that plug into this to help you fully flush this out. So if you'd like to go ahead, Mayuli, you're welcome to.
And what, monks, is right speech? Refraining from lying, refraining from slander, refraining from harsh speech, refraining from frivolous speech. This is called right speech. And what, monks, is right action? Refraining from taking life, refraining from taking what is not given, refraining from sexual misconduct. This is called right action. And what, monks, is right livelihood? Here, monks, the noble disciple, having given up wrong livelihood, keeps himself by right livelihood.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm going to pause you here so we can talk about the moral conduct, and then we'll finish it out with the mental discipline. So the right speech, this is how you interact with people through your communication, right? During the lifetime of the Buddha, all there was speech. But nowadays, we might think about this like right communication, because how you communicate versus, verbally, text messages, emails, phone calls, social media posts, this is all going to determine what kind of results you experience. Whereas if you're lying or you're slandering, which is like gossip and degrading other people's reputation, or you're having harsh or aggressive or hostile or bitter speech, or you're having frivolous speech, which is just yada, 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 no beneficial aspect to it. It's just kind of broadcasting. There isn't any real conversation being involved. If you're doing any of these things, you can improve this, because as long as you're doing these things, it's based in craving, desire, attachment. Because remember, right view is all about eliminating craving, desire, attachment. The Buddha is bringing your awareness to the problem of craving, desire, attachment, and that you need to eliminate it. Well, when you're lying, there's something that you're craving. There's something you're wanting. And if you tell the truth, you're not going to get it. So the mind lies. So in order to clean up your craving, you're going to need to always tell the truth. Or to slander and gossip another person. This is oftentimes people thinking that if I extinguish another person's candle and make them look like less of a person, it'll help me to shine brighter. But this isn't actually true. If you walk into a room and there's 2 candles and you put one out, then the room isn't as bright anymore. So when you're gossiping or slandering other people, at the very least, you're going to experience people gossiping and slandering you. But at the height of this, you can get beat up and you can even get murdered. There's people that have been murdered over damaging someone's reputation. So this is why the Buddha is teaching you this. This isn't rules or commandments. This is about wise decision making, understanding the cause and effect, or the action and result. Whenever you see moral conduct from the Buddha, he's helping you understand the natural law of Gama, of how one thing leads to another. And if you are lying, people aren't going to trust you. You're going to have craving, desire, attachment in your mind. You're going to find that it's challenging to perform professionally and in your personal relationships. Same thing if you're slandering. You're going to have difficulty in your personal and professional relationships. You can even get murdered, or at the very least, people are going to be slandering you. If you have harsh speech, like hostility and bitterness, like your tone, your tempo, and your word choice is harsh, this is going to promote hostile relationships and resentful relationships. And if you have frivolous speech or idle chatter, where you're just yada, 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 broadcasting instead of having a conversation, people are going to tune you out, and you're not going to be able to be influential. So there's a deeper teaching that you're going to learn as we go forward called the 5 factors of well-spoken speech that plugs into this. But this is the first layer of purification that you would like to improve this. So if there's any of these that you're challenged with right now, I would encourage you to work on eliminating lying, slander, harsh speech, and frivolous speech. And this will help you to not make unwise decisions related to your speech. And then you'll see that because you're making wise decisions, more and more wholesome results are coming back to you. With bodily action or right action, the Buddha is describing 3 important things that would be detrimental if you did these things, because there's this cause and effect, as I mentioned, with the natural law of Gama. He's talking about taking life, about taking what is not given, which is stealing, and sexual misconduct. Now, in the 5 precepts, which you're also going to learn in this program, these plug into here, and it fully explains what these things are. Because here in the Eightfold Path, it's more of a core central teaching that's pulling together multiple things. When you see things like refrain from taking life, or from stealing, or from sexual misconduct, it can sound a little bit black and white, but you're going to see that in the teachings of the Buddha, he explains this in a lot more detail that gives you more illuminating details that helps you to navigate the world. Because you might be asking yourself, well, what is sexual misconduct? When you see the 5 precepts, which I also teach in the foundational programs, and we're going to describe it in this program as well, but just not to the same level of detail as we talk about in the foundational programs, you're going to understand what sexual misconduct is and all these other things, because it's not black and white. It's not preserve all life at all costs, right? Because that would be detrimental if you thought that way. Or refrain from taking what's not given. Say you were walking down the street in your community and somebody was cutting their grass, and maybe they had a large laceration across their arm, and you saw one of the neighbors has a piece of cloth that you could put a tourniquet on their arm and stop their bleeding and save their life. Well, you're probably not going to knock on the door, just wait for them to come and wait and knock on the door. Excuse me, can I use this fabric? We have someone bleeding to death over here, right? You're not going to do that. You're going to just grab that piece of fabric and go take care of what you need to take care of, and then maybe compensate the person later or talk to the person later. So there's certain things that you need to know about right action that doesn't really get drawn out here in the Eightfold Path, because it's just a summary and he's pointing to the 5 precepts. But if you study the 5 precepts, then what you come to understand is that what the Buddha is teaching you about is not to cause harm through your bodily actions. And in this situation, this example of getting the fabric and putting a tourniquet on someone's arm, you haven't caused any harm, right? You're actually saving someone's life in this situation. And then maybe you make amends with this fabric. Maybe you pay for it. Maybe it's $5, or the person probably wouldn't even take any money from you in that situation. Or maybe you replace it with another fabric or something like this. But there's all different kinds of ways that you would like to look at this. It's not black and white. And moving to this higher consciousness is to understand the variables in any given situation, process that through your wisdom, and figure out what would be the wisest choice in order to produce wholesome results. So here, the Buddha is just giving you some very basic information because he explores it and expands upon it in the 5 precepts. But just understand that it would be unwise to cause any bodily harm through your actions of your body. Like if you punch somebody in the face, they're most likely going to punch you back, or pull a knife, or get a gun, or their family and friends are going to attack you. Or if you're dragging your suitcase down the aisle of a plane and running over people's feet and bumping into their knees. The Buddha doesn't talk about that here because planes didn't even exist during his lifetime. And he's not giving you a comprehensive list of everything that is right action. He's just giving you kind of a summary. But you can apply this to any and all aspects of your life if you understand that right action is not causing harm through your bodily actions. And then here with right livelihood, he's really just giving you something super basic, because in other parts of his teachings, which you're going to see, he expands upon this and gives you a lot of detail around right livelihood. And again, you'll see this in all the foundational programs. You'll see me explain it in all those programs and in volume 1 of the book series too, because there's 5 livelihoods that could cause harm. And then that means you would be sustaining your life based on causing harm to others. And there are certain ways that he gives you about in terms of practicing your livelihood, like ensuring you're not scheming or having corruption, making sure you're not flattering people and having insincere comments, that you're not hinting or belittling or just pursuing gain, like just for the sake of profit. Essentially, what the Buddha guides you to, if you learn and practice his teachings, is getting to a point where you're so enthusiastic and motivated about the livelihood that you've chosen that you would even do it for free if you could, because you just enjoy it that much. But of course, you need to collect some kind of money to sustain your life. But oftentimes when people have a livelihood, they haven't selected it based on right livelihood. So therefore, they kind of drag themselves to work. They really don't like what they're doing. And that's not going to lead to a peaceful and joyful mind and a peaceful and joyful life. So you're going to need to purify your livelihood in the way that the Buddha teaches in his other teachings, so that you can get to a point where not only your personal life is at ease and very comfortable, but even your work life, you just enjoy it. It doesn't even feel like work. You just have motivation and enthusiasm around your work. So this is just a little bit of the moral conduct section of the Eightfold Path with right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And you would like to apply this to all parts of your life. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this section. It looks like Helena has a question. I've read that idle speech could potentially lead to a rebirth in the hell realm. I don't understand how one thing could lead to the other, landing in hell just because of a craving to talk meaninglessly. Would you please explain? What you have been exposed to there is not anything that I've shared, Helena. And this is the challenge of diving into what other people are sharing, is it may or may not actually be the truth and be accurate. There isn't just one thing that can lead to rebirth in a particular realm. It's not possible for that to occur. In fact, the Buddha says it very clearly that to discern the exact result of Kama, it would lead to either madness or frustration. So I know that what you were exposed to there wasn't through the resources that I share. And this is why oftentimes I guide students to just set aside those kinds of things while you're learning the original teachings of the Buddha, because it'll just confuse you. But if you decide to look at those things, feel free. But sometimes when people do that, I end up spending more time helping them sort out their confusion than just making progress on the path, where if they just stayed focused on the original words of the Buddha, they could just make so much more progress. So there isn't just one thing like that that's going to lead to rebirth in the hell realm. And remember, the Buddha isn't trying to guilt or shame or fear you into doing anything. He's helping you to understand how to get to this peaceful and joyful mental state, so there isn't any rebirth anywhere. And you can see that your mind's doing that as you're getting closer and closer to enlightenment. Looks like Vibhav, you have another question as well. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thank you. I had two questions actually. Sorry. One question is around in the right action. In other places, they talk about also not refraining from substances, taking substances that cause heedlessness as another right action. But in this case, it's kind of limited to just taking life and not giving in sexual misconduct. Any reason why that's omitted here?
Yeah, understand that this is a summary teaching where the Buddha is teaching you at a high level, but then he's got other teachings that plug into this. And refraining from taking substances that cause heedlessness is one of those things. So if the Buddha put every single thing in the Eightfold Path, this would be an enormous teaching. Because remember, there's 45 volumes of books in the Pali Canon. This is the core central teaching that everything else plugs into. So when you see those kinds of things, you'll understand that it plugs in here under right action. But when he talks about the Eightfold Path, this is like just to get you started knocking down some of the big unwise decisions that people make. And this is like a starting point. And then as you explore his other teachings, you're able to see those, like in the 5 precepts. The one that you just mentioned is a aspect of the 5 precepts that plugs in here. So he doesn't put an exhaustive list of right action here, because it would just be endless, and he wouldn't be able to think of every single action that you could potentially do. But here he gives you the 3 major ones. And then you can understand that anytime you're causing harm with the body, this would be unwise, because it's going to produce unwholesome results.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
My other question was on the right livelihood and the basic 5 traits that we have been, the Buddha said not to do for the household practitioner, basically the weapons, living beings, meat, substances that cause heedlessness, poisons. I guess 99.9% of the world does not do it. Only there are very few people who lie in these traits. And I think I've asked this question before, but there are traits that have come up in the last 2,500 years that were not in the Buddha's time. And so how do we think about new things? I think I asked a question about social media at one point of time. Like something like Facebook, which gives you a lot of, gives people it kind of intentionally or unintentionally feeds some of the desires and craving and desires of people. that are not, that people would probably not do otherwise. Like the whole communication that chain that has been happening over the last 2000 years with, first like it's written language and then radio and then TV and then like social media has kind of increased the level of, or allowed people to have more craving, desire, attachments to all these things and try to find feed their craving, desire, attachments to these trades.
Okay.
And so there's a fine line between. So I guess the five trades that Buddha has employed are very like black and white, but there are these trades which are kind of have fine line, which is not like neither positive nor negative, but there's somewhere in the middle. And how do we think about working in those trades?
Okay, so two things to address here. First, I wouldn't agree that 99.9% or 99% of the population of the world isn't practicing one of those five livelihoods of business in weapons, business in living beings, business in meat, business in substances that cause heedlessness, and business in poisons. I think the number is much higher, but that's neither here nor there. But I would encourage you to not grab onto that number and cling to it and recite that if you haven't actually seen the truth, that there's actually been a real tangible study that shares that, because we would like to speak the truth. And part of speaking the truth is, yes, not telling a deliberate lie, but also making sure that when we speak that it's something that we know with 100% certainty. So I would like to be sure I share that with you. The second thing is that the Buddha taught the natural laws of existence. These are the natural laws. They haven't changed. They won't change. He encapsulated everything in his teachings that is going to lead to enlightenment. And the five livelihoods that he teaches are the five livelihoods that are going to cause harm. You're perceiving things like TV and Facebook and things like this as being harmful. But that is just a mind that is not understanding what is harmful and what is unharmful. So if someone's working at a place like Facebook, I think that's what you mentioned, like social media, you've asked me this question before. All they're doing is they're sitting there touching a keyboard and coding. And they're also talking to other people, and they're having meetings and things like this. In this situation, they're not having business of weapons, living beings, meat, substances that cause heedlessness, and poisons. So the five livelihoods that the Buddha is teaching you, you can look at them and independently verify that they're causing harm. Computer code sitting on a server somewhere that somebody's accessing doesn't cause any harm. Because if that was the case, every single person who would be using that would be experiencing harm. I use Facebook extensively in order to help share these teachings around the world. I don't experience any harm from Facebook whatsoever. The harm that people are experiencing is that they're in Facebook and they're having messages or they're reading posts and things like this, and then they experience painful feelings. They experience anger and sadness and frustration or bitterness or hostility, and they start fighting. And this is because of their own decisions, their own actions. Or if they have a craving, desire, attachment to constantly check Facebook and click like and love and care and all those things, and they're constantly looking at their updates, that's their own craving, desire, attachment. Facebook isn't creating that. So there's no harm that Facebook is creating by choosing to write some code and put it on a server somewhere. But there's a lot of people in the world that look at something like Facebook or maybe violent video games. They consider those to be harmful, or certain TV programs or things like this. None of that stuff is actually causing harm. If somebody chooses to listen to it, or they choose to do it, and then they get upset, or say somebody has a conversation on Facebook and they go and commit suicide, or they go commit a murder, this is choices that people are making. This isn't from the company of Facebook itself. So it's important to be able to see what harm is where you're causing harm to someone physically, like they're physically being injured, that you're harming their material possessions, or you're harming their reputation. So in working at a place like Facebook or Instagram or any of these other social media places, you're not injuring anyone's physically, you're not injuring their material possessions, and you're not injuring their reputation by doing that type of work. But when you're working in weapons, the work that you're doing is these weapons are to go out and kill other living beings. if you're having business in living beings like slavery or prostitution, or maybe you're selling animals for profit, this is causing harm to certain beings. Or if you're having business in meat, animals have to be killed in order for that to occur. Or substances that cause heedlessness, you're putting substances into the community that's causing harm to other people. And then with the business and poisons, once again, these are actually designed to kill living beings. So that's why the Buddha taught these 5 livelihoods, and it's going to be the same livelihoods now and forever. There doesn't need to be anything that needs to be updated, because these are the natural laws.
Yes, I guess the way to look at something like social media is that if everybody was having wholesome thoughts and they were following the words of the Buddha and doing the Eightfold Path and communicating with the right speech and right action, everything would be positive. I guess that's the way to look at it.
Yeah, but you can also take that same scenario. Let's get rid of Facebook and say that it doesn't even exist. If people go out into a public park and they're aggressive and hostile and bitter, there's going to be fights and arguments and difficulties there too. So it's not that Facebook is creating those things. Even when Facebook was gone, there was still anger and hostility and bitterness in the world. It's not Facebook that's causing that. Facebook is providing a meeting point for people to come together. And then because of people's craving anger and ignorance in their mind, that's where the difficulties are occurring, that people are making unwise decisions. But the livelihood of producing code for a social media platform isn't actually causing any harm, because you're sitting in an office pressing a keyboard. You haven't caused physical harm, material harm to possessions, or harm to anybody's reputation.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let me see if we have any other questions. Okay, I don't see any in Zoom. Let me check YouTube and Facebook and see if we have anything there. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere else on our platform. So let's go to the next section, Mayuli. And if you'd like to go ahead and read this, although it's quite long, but and quite detailed. This is the mental discipline section. Go ahead, Mayuli.
And what, monks, is right effort? Here, monks, a monk arouses his will, makes an effort, stirs up energy, exerts his mind, and strives to prevent the arising of unarisen, evil, unwholesome mental states. He arouses his will, makes an effort, stirs up energy, exerts his mind, and strives to overcome evil, unwholesome mental states that have arisen. He arouses his will, makes an effort, stirs up energy, exerts his mind, and strives to produce unarisen, wholesome mental states. He arouses his will, makes an effort, stirs up energy, exerts his mind, and strives to maintain wholesome mental states that have arisen. Not to let them fade away, to bring them to greater growth, to the full perfection of development. This is called right effort. And what, monks, is right mindfulness? Here, monks, a monk resides reflecting on body as body, dedicated, clearly aware and mindful, having put aside craving and worry for the world. He resides reflecting on feelings as feelings, dedicated, clearly aware and mindful, having put aside craving and worry for the world. He resides reflecting on mind as mind, dedicated, clearly aware and mindful, having put aside craving and worry for the world. He resides reflecting on mental objects as mental objects, dedicated, clearly aware and mindful, having put aside craving and worry for the world. This is called right mindfulness. And what, monks, is right concentration? Here, a monk distant from sense desires, distance from unwholesome mental states, enter and resides in the first jhana, which is with thinking and pondering, based in seclusion, filled with excitement and joy, and with the subsiding of thinking and pondering by gaining inner tranquility and oneness of mind, he enters and resides in the second jhana, which is without thinking and pondering, based in concentration, filled with excitement and joy, and with the fading away of excitement, remaining imperturbable, unable to be upset or excited, calm, serene, mindful, and clearly aware, he experiences in himself the joy of which the Noble One say, peaceful is who he resides with equanimity and mindfulness. He enters the third jhana, and having given up pleasure and pain, and with the fading away of former gladness and sadness, he enters and resides in the fourth jhana, which is beyond pleasure and pain, and purified by equanimity and mindfulness. This is called right concentration. And that, monks, is called the way of practice leading to the elimination of discontentedness.
Okay, thank you, Mayu Li. So here, this is the mental discipline section of the Eightfold Path, starting with right effort, right mindfulness, and then right concentration. These are all working in concert together, as are the other sections too. You wouldn't be able to implement the moral conduct section without understanding and practicing the mental discipline, because the mental discipline is helping you to practice the moral conduct. So that's why I mentioned it's 8 individual dials that you're dialing in. It's not like you're mastering one step before you move to the other. You're actually practicing all of these at the same time and dialing them in closer and closer. Right effort has 4 aspects to it. This is where you're working to prevent any unwholesome qualities from coming into the mind. That any unwholesome qualities that are currently in the mind, you apply the effort to eliminate them. Any wholesome qualities that are not currently in the mind, you need to apply the effort to bring those into the mind. And then any wholesome qualities that are currently in the mind, you need to bring them to full growth and full perfection. And I explained this in detail, like I mentioned in the foundational program. Then there's right mindfulness, which here with right mindfulness, the way to understand it to just get started is awareness of mind, that you're going to need to have awareness of the mind. If you're going to purify the mind and eliminate unwholesome qualities and cultivate wholesome qualities, you're going to need to know what is going on in the mind. So that's what you're cultivating in your mind at all times is awareness of the mind. But more specifically, the Buddha is talking about the 4 foundations of mindfulness, where you're aware of the bodily sensations, the feelings, the condition of the mind, and the mental objects. The bodily sensations are certain sensations in the body that are experienced prior to the mind becoming discontent. We're not just talking about an itch, or maybe you stumped your toe and there's a bodily sensation, or maybe you touch something and you feel some sensation in your fingers. That's not what we're talking about. What the Buddha is talking about here with reflecting on body is to be aware of those bodily sensations. Like before you get angry, there's this tingling that comes up the body perhaps, maybe a tightening of the chest, maybe a tightening in the throat, maybe you get heat in your face or pressure in your skull. If you're not aware of these things now related to discontentedness, you're going to need to develop awareness of those. And the next step, right concentration, is going to help you to be able to do that. Because you need to be able to cut off and let go of the arising discontentedness as a bodily sensation. And this is going to take time to gradually build this. It's not going to be 1 week or 1 month, but over time, as you develop your life practice, you'll become more and more aware of the bodily sensations. Then you're going to need to have awareness of the feelings, like, the mind's angry or frustrated. That's the next step, that if you don't cut it off as a bodily sensation, it's going to become a feeling. Then if you don't cut it off as a feeling, it's going to affect the condition of the mind. That's where he says, reflecting on mind as mind, that if you've ever been angry or irritated or agitated for a few hours or a few days or maybe a week or two, you've been grumpy, this is because you didn't understand the teachings of the Buddha and you didn't cut it off and let it go as a bodily sensation. You didn't get it there. You didn't even know about it, perhaps. You didn't even have the wisdom of that. Or you didn't catch it as a feeling. You didn't cut it off there. So that's why the condition of the mind was affected for multiple hours, days, or a week or so. And then there's something called mental objects. These are deeply rooted containers in the mind, such as the 10 fetters. These are the 10 individual pollutions that are in the mind. You're going to need to have awareness of what these are so that you understand the symptoms of them, that you understand how to eliminate them, that you understand how to know that it's actually been eliminated from the mind. This is something I'm going to be teaching in a retreat coming up in August. We have a retreat here in Thailand that you're welcome to attend, or you can attend online because I'll be live streaming it, where I'm going to spend an entire class period on every single fetter, because you're going to need that awareness of what is the fetter, how to know the symptoms when it's starting to arise, how to actually eliminate it from the mind, and how to know that it's actually been eliminated. So we're going to spend time doing that. So that's where right mindfulness is the 4 foundations of mindfulness. But when you're first getting started, you might just start to practice awareness of the mind. Have general awareness of your thoughts, your ideas, your feelings, and start to clue in more and more to those bodily sensations associated with conditioned pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and neither painful nor pleasant. This is what you would like to clue into with your mindfulness. And right concentration is going to help you to be able to do that. Here in right concentration in the Eightfold Path, the Buddha is explaining the results of having put together all the Eightfold Path. He's explaining the jhanas. These are preliminary phases that the mind goes through before you get to the first stage of enlightenment. But in other parts of his teachings, he explains how to practice right concentration. The practice of right concentration involves developing a meditation practice of breathing mindfulness meditation and loving kindness meditation, and practicing singleness of mind in day-to-day life, where you're just doing one thing at a time instead of jumping around from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing to thing to thing. So I describe this in detail in all the other classes and all the other materials, but here I just kind of introduce you to this and talk about it from a high level. Is there any questions that you guys have on the Eightfold Path from right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration? Because from this point forward, whenever this comes up, I'm just going to say, are there any questions? We're not even going to read it as part of the class. So is there any questions on the mental discipline section? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. Mayuli, I think your hand's up from reading, but if you do have a question, feel free to leave your hand up so I can call on you. Maybe you have a question. Nope. Okay, there we go. All right. So I don't see any questions, so we'll move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 12. Maybe Julie has a question. You have a question on the Eightfold Path?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Being on the tablet, I have to do about 3 or 4 things to get to the raise your hand deal. So I'm going to kind of fly my hand around here to get your attention.
Oh, okay. It won't show me, though, because there's so many people on the Zoom that the only way for it to pop up where I'll see it is for the electronic raising of the hand.
Yeah, it just takes time. And by the time I get there, you're usually moving on. So anyway, could you clarify a little more between feelings and like the 10 fetters? Because it seems to me that those kind of overlap.
Sure. So the feeling is inside the mind, that the mind is now angry. The mind is now experiencing anger or frustration. That's the actual feeling, the emotion, someone might say. The mental object is like the deeply rooted container, like central desire or ill will or conceit, right? Like the arrogance, the pride. Those are deeply rooted containers that are motivating unskillful conduct, but they by themselves aren't a feeling or emotion. They're just kind of like a collection of pollution or a bucket of pollution, the way you can think about it. Does that help you?
I'm not sure.
Okay, so let's do it this way. So when the mind is frustrated, right? This is coming from craving, desire, attachment. If there's central desire in the mind, there's longing, yearning. The mind wants things to be a certain way. So in that example of the music that I used last week, where if you're in a car and you hear some music that you don't particularly like, there's a craving in the mind that wants this rap and hip hop music, for example. And now when you hear hard rock and instrumental music through the ear, now because of the mind's craving and having had contact with this music, now that craving arises the anger and the frustration. And now the mind is experiencing the feeling of frustration. But where this is coming from is the mental object of central desire, and then the mental object of ill will. Those are the mental objects that are motivating this feeling to arise. And you need to have awareness of all 4 of these things in order to purify the mind.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure I can't recall what all the 10 fetters are right now, but it just seems like I'm trying to figure out if that's kind of a subset of feelings, or if feelings are a subset of the fetters, or,
Feelings are a result of the fetters, that because the fetters are in the mind, there's now going to be conditioned feelings. If it wasn't for these deeply rooted containers, these mental objects that are in the mind, the feelings, these conditioned feelings would not exist. So the feelings are coming from these deeply rooted containers in the mind.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Okay, let me see if we have any other questions that have come in. All right, I'm not seeing anything else. So let's move to the next chapter, which is chapter 12. And Vibhav, you were interested in reading, so you can go ahead, sir.
Thank you. The world would not lack for arahants. In whatever teachings and discipline the Noble Eightfold Path is not found, no ascetic is found of the first, the second, the third, or the fourth grade. But such ascetics can be found of the first, second, third, and fourth grade in a teachings and discipline where the Noble Eightfold Path is found. Now, Buddha, in these teachings and discipline, the Noble Eightfold Path is found, and in it are to be found ascetics of the first, second, third, and fourth grade. These other schools are lacking of true ascetics, but if in this one the monks were to live the life to perfection, the world would not lack for arahants.
Okay, thank you, sir. So what an arahant is an arahant is an enlightened being. This is the way they would describe an enlightened being during the lifetime of the Buddha, that if you eliminate the 10 fetters, which are the 10 individual pollutions, the mind is now purified, the mind is now enlightened. And they would refer to this person as an arahant. So there's 4 stages that the mind goes through as it's getting to enlightenment. And the 4th stage is called arahant, or that's where the mind is now enlightened, or we might refer to that as an enlightened being that has been fully purified of the 10 fetters, or these mental objects. And as you're moving through these 4 stages of enlightenment, the discontentedness is gradually diminishing more and more and more. That by the time you get to the 1st stage of enlightenment, your discontent feelings has significantly reduced. It's just a mere fraction of what it once used to be. And nowadays, we call it 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th stage of enlightenment. But during the lifetime of the Buddha, they would refer to it as stream entry, as once returner, non-returner, and arahant. And some people understand what these things mean. And I teach this in chapter 3 of volume 1, because as you're moving through these stages of enlightenment, you'll see this significant reduction of discontentedness. But what the Buddha is describing here is he's saying, if there isn't a collection of teachings that doesn't have the Eightfold Path, then there's no ability for anybody to get to the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th stage of enlightenment, or have an enlightened mind. That you would need to learn and practice the Eightfold Path in order to be able to get to enlightenment. And he's saying, void of that, then there would be no ability to get to enlightenment. Now, when we sit here and think about the Buddha 2,500 years ago, we might think that, he was the only one teaching. Because if there was a Buddha alive during your lifetime, you would probably be interested in learning from that person. But the challenge is that there isn't any kind of physical characteristic that determines who is a Buddha and who isn't a Buddha. So during the lifetime of the Buddha, there were people that understood that he was a Buddha, but there's some people who didn't understand that. And there were plenty of other teachers, just like today, where you see lots of teachers around claiming that it's their teachings that lead to enlightenment. But the Buddha knew that it was his teachings that led to enlightenment. And it was the Eightfold Path that was a core central teaching that was needed in order to be able to get to enlightenment. And these other teachers were teaching other things. But the Buddha knew that it was his teachings that led to enlightenment, and that's why he was dedicated to share them. And it's the Eightfold Path that is the core central teaching that is needed to be able to get to the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th stage of enlightenment. And the Buddha is saying, if people practice the Eightfold Path to perfection, then there would be no lack of enlightened beings in the world. Right? So if more and more and more people decide that they would like to practice the teachings of the Buddha and learning the Eightfold Path, that's what's going to produce enlightened beings throughout the world. So any questions here on this particular chapter? All right, I'm not seeing any questions. So we'll move to chapter 13. Would somebody like to read this one? Okay. I saw a bunch of hands. All right. Yihang, I saw your hand go up. I saw Mayu Li. Maybe we'll let Yihang read so that we have somebody else read. And then Mayu Li, and I think Julie offered a volunteer as well.
Thank you.
Sure, go ahead.
The difference between the Tathagata and a monk liberated by wisdom. Monks, the Tathagata, the Arahant, the perfectly enlightened one, liberated by non-clinging through a fading away of strong feelings towards form, through its fading away and elimination, is called a perfectly enlightened one. A monk liberated by wisdom, liberated by non-clinging, through a fading away of strong feelings towards form, through its fading away and elimination, is called one liberated by wisdom. The Tathagata, the Arahant, the perfectly enlightened one, liberated by non-clinging through a fading away of strong feelings towards feeling, perception, volitional formations, choices, decisions, consciousness through its fading away and elimination, is called a perfectly enlightened one. A monk liberated by wisdom, liberated by non-clinging through a fading away of strong feelings towards feeling, perception, volitional formations, choices and decisions, consciousness through its fading away and elimination, is called one liberated by wisdom. Therein, monks, what is the distinction? What is the disparity? What is the difference between the Tathagata, the Arahant, the perfectly enlightened one, and a monk liberated by wisdom? The Tathagata monks, the Arahant, the perfectly enlightened one, is the originator of the path unrisen before, the producer of the path unproduced before, the declarer of the path undeclared before. He is the knower of the path, the discoverer of the path, the one skilled in the path, and his disciples now reside practicing that path and become possessed of it afterwards. These monks is the distinction, the disparity, the difference between the Tathagata, the Arahant, the perfectly enlightened one, and a monk liberated by wisdom.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So here what this discourse is doing is drawing a distinction between a Buddha or a Tathagata and an enlightened being. That some places nowadays, they might teach you that everybody is a Buddha. But the Buddha didn't actually say this. The Buddha never taught that a Buddha is very rare in the world. If you remember back to the teachings from last week, that the Buddha talks about how rare it is that a Buddha exists in the world. And here he's now describing the difference. The difference is that a Buddha is the discoverer of the path, the declarer of the path. They're the ones who figure out how to get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. Then they dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their independently discovered teachings with countless people in the world. And countless people get to enlightenment during that period of time that person is alive. But then they preserve their teachings so that countless more people get to enlightenment after their death. And this is what a Buddha is, or a Tathagata. The word Tathagata means the one who discovers the truth, or the one who discerns the truth, or one who shares the truth. That's what the word Tathagata means. And this is the way the Buddha would often refer to himself. He very rarely referred to himself as an actual Buddha. He most frequently referred to himself as the Tathagata. This is a way to refer to himself in the third person so that he's not reinforcing the self. If you've learned about the universal truth of non-self and the elimination of personal existence view, speaking in the third person helps the mind disassociate with this being as who you are as a person. And then as an enlightened being is liberated by wisdom, that they cultivate the wisdom of a Buddha in order to be able to then get to enlightenment. And this is the difference and distinction between them. So while other people might talk about everybody being a Buddha, you can see the truth here that the Buddha talks about how rare it is, that it's very rare that a Buddha arises in the world. The last one that the world's currently aware of existed over 2,500 years ago, that it's very rare. And a Buddha is going to be the discoverer, the declarer, the originator of the path. And then everyone else is going to get liberated by the wisdom of that path that he shares. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Mayuli, I think your hand is up to read, but let me just check, see if you have a question here or on the other chapter. No question?
No, just to read.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much. It's wonderful having so many volunteers. Okay, so I'm going to move to the next chapter, and I just happened to see Julie's hand because her camera was at a place where I could see it on my screen. So Julie, if you would like to raise your hand electronically, that'll put you in a position where oh, there you are. I can just unmute you here. And then Mayuli, maybe if you'd like to read the one after that, then we could have you read the one afterwards.
Monks, this spiritual life is not lived for the sake of deceiving people and persuading them, nor for the benefit of gain, honor, and praise, nor for the benefit of winning in debates, nor with the thought, let the people know me thus. But rather, this spiritual life is lived for the sake of restraint, abandoning, freedom from strong feelings, and elimination.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So here the Buddha is explaining that the goal of getting to enlightenment and walking this spiritual path, it isn't for conceit or arrogance or pride, gain, benefits and honor and praise. Because sometimes as people are learning things like this and they're becoming more and more wise, you can notice the conceits arise because you're going to learn things on this path that are not common knowledge, and you're going to have deep wisdom as part of understanding the path to enlightenment. And if at any point you allow your conceit to arise, your arrogance, your pride, your boastfulness, your measuring and comparing, thinking that you're so great and other people are below you, or perhaps putting yourself lower than other people and looking up to people with such awe and admiration, this is not going to be healthy for your mind. So the Buddha is teaching you that the point of this spiritual path is to eliminate strong feelings, to get to enlightenment, where you can have freedom from those conditioned feelings, those strong feelings. You can eliminate them from the mind. It's not for the benefit of winning in debates, because you're going to become very smart. You're going to become very wise. You're going to know things that other people don't know. You're going to see people struggling with the most insignificant things that just seem so obvious to you, based on the wisdom that you cultivate about the natural laws of existence, but yet they're struggling with this situation. So you're going to need to get to the point where you're humble and you're not interested in doing what the Buddha says here, which is let the people know me thus, right? So you're not interested in that arrogance and pride. And winning in debates is like arguing, right? Here, the Buddha is talking about his teachings, that this path is not to go out and debate people and show that you're so smart than other people. And you can apply that to the teachings of the Buddha for sure, but you can also apply this to other parts of your life too. If you have certain political views, or you have a certain knowledge about one particular technology or another, or one particular line of study or some topic, you're not interested in going out and professing how smart and how much of an expert you are with a puffed up chest and this arrogance and ego oozing out of you, because people are just going to push you aside when they see that ego coming at them. So it's best to be humble. And as you're practicing these teachings, your mind's becoming more concentrated and focused. You might see some conceit rising up because there's a fetter or a mental object or pollution called conceit. And we're going to talk about this in the group learning program in about a week when we get to chapter 16, not this Sunday, tomorrow, but next Sunday. I'm going to be talking about how to dissolve the ego and eliminating it. And here you can see from the Buddha where he's talking about this in this particular discourse. And there's other discourses where he talks about not being puffed up or boastful or arrogant and prideful and things like this. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. So it looks like Francis has a question. What is the actual meaning of strong feelings? Those are the conditioned feelings. So the conditioned pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and neither painful nor pleasant. So a strong feeling is a conditional feeling because it's based in craving, desire, attachment. There's a longing, yearning. So by the time you get to enlightenment, though, you won't even have the slightest of conditioned feelings. Like right now, if you wake up and you just feel a little bit icky, or you just feel a little bit off one day or another, you won't even feel that. You won't even notice that. It's not even there, because the causes and conditions that are producing it have been eliminated. So what a Buddha does is they typically talk in extremes, because people will understand the extremes. Where if you talk in subtleties, people don't necessarily understand them. So not only are you getting freedom from strong feelings, but you're even getting freedom from the slightest little bit of ickiness in the mind by the time you get to enlightenment. Your mind is just always comfortable. You're always at ease. The mind is what we call in Thailand, sabai sabai, so comfortable, so relaxed, feeling so great and so wonderful all the time. But when there's craving, desire, attachment in the mind, you're going to have certain feelings that are either strong or even on the lighter end of the spectrum, just a little bit of ickiness where you feel off in one particular day or another. But you won't experience this by the time you fully train your mind and fully purify it. Okay. I don't see any questions anywhere else. So Mayuli, if you're still interested in reading, we've got this next chapter coming up, chapter 15.
Both formerly and now, what the Tathagata teaches is contentedness and the elimination of discontentedness. So saying, monks, so proclaiming, I have been blamelessly, pointlessly, falsely, and wrongly misrepresented by ascetics and Brahmin. Thus, the ascetics Gotama is one who leads astray. He teaches the obliteration, the destruction, the extermination of an existence being, as I am not, as I do not proclaim. So I have been baselessly, pointlessly, falsely, and wrongly misrepresented by some ascetics and Brahmin. Thus, the ascetic Gotama is one who leads astray. He teaches an obliteration, the destruction, the extermination of an existent being. Monks, both formerly and now, that I teach is discontentedness and the elimination of discontentedness. If others abuse, criticize, scold, and harass the Tathagata for that, the Tathagata on the account feels no annoyance, bitterness, or sadness of the mind. And if others honor, respect, appreciate, and venerate the Tathagata for that, the Tathagata on the account feels no happiness, excitement, or elation of the mind. If others honor, respect, appreciate, and venerate the Tathagata for that, the Tathagata on the account thinks thus. They perform such services and as these for the sake of what had earlier come to be fully understood.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. There's a lot going on in this teaching. It's a very short teaching, but there's a lot going on here. So let me help you guys understand it. The first part, the Buddha is saying that people are essentially slandering him and gossiping him, that they're misrepresenting what he's actually teaching, that what people are sharing is that he teaches the obliteration, the destruction, the extermination of an existing being, basically like exterminating existing beings. And the Buddha is saying, hey, they're completely misrepresenting me. Because remember, there's other teachers out there during the lifetime of the Buddha that are teaching all different kinds of things. They don't know that he's the Buddha, right? Because the three criteria that makes a Buddha don't get fully understood until someone actually has died, because they need to get to enlightenment by themselves, which people would have known that of the Buddha. They would need to dedicate the rest of their life to sharing their teachings, and countless people would be getting to enlightenment. But then they need to preserve their teachings so that other people can get to enlightenment after their death. So not everybody knew that he was a Buddha during his lifetime. And not even today, not everyone even knows what a Buddha is. So there were ascetics and Brahmins in other places that were gossiping and slandering the Buddha, right? This is really helpful for you to understand, because when people are gossiping and slandering you, you might get really upset by that. You might get really frustrated. Well, if people gossip and slander the Buddha, you can be sure they're going to gossip and slander you too. You can't control what other people are doing. So this is going to happen during your life. And here the Buddha gives us guidance about what he teaches and how he handles this situation. He says, what he teaches is discontentedness and the elimination of discontentedness. That's what he teaches, how to get to this peaceful and joyful mental state. He's not teaching to destroy human beings or to obliterate and eliminate human beings. That's not what he's teaching. So somebody was gossiping about him like he has some power to magically, obliterate human beings or something. But instead, what he's teaching is how to eliminate discontentedness from the mind. And then he says, okay, if others abuse, criticize, scold, or harass him for that, meaning that they're angry and they're upset with him, he says, okay, if people think negatively of me, I'm not annoyed, I don't feel bitterness, and I don't feel sadness, right? This is what an enlightened being experiences. But on the contrary, if people honor, respect, and appreciate and venerate him for sharing the teachings to eliminate discontentedness, he experiences no happiness, excitement, or elation because of that, right? These would be conditioned feelings. His mind is in the middle, where he doesn't get happy and excited when somebody honors and respects him. So therefore, he doesn't feel angry and sad and bitter and frustrated when somebody disrespects him, right? His mind is in the middle. He can be unaffected by this, and he just knows that he's sharing the teachings that it takes to be able to get to enlightenment. Then he says, if others honor, respect, and appreciate him for sharing his teachings, then they're doing this because they have come to fully understand his teachings. That's why. That if somebody's going to honor, respect, and appreciate him, that's because they fully understood his teachings. Because if you learn and you practice his teachings, you'll see that they lead exactly where he said they do, to this enlightened mental state where the mind's peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, that there's no discontentedness whatsoever. So that might be the reason why somebody is honoring and respecting him. But the people who are angry and bitter and harsh and hostile, it's just because they don't understand what he teaches. If they understood what he taught and they actually practiced it, they would eliminate the causes and conditions that are producing that hostility, that is producing that disgruntledness that's in the mind. So those people, they're just not understanding what he taught, and his mind is unaffected by it. So this is what you would ultimately like to get to as well. So say you're making some decisions about your home or your children or your career or something like this, and say your family or your friends or people in the neighborhood, they're maybe bitter and harsh and hostile. Well, just consider it, okay, their mind is causing that. You don't need to get upset or sad just because other people are being bitter and harsh and hostile. And the way to be able to train your mind to accomplish that is this part where the Buddha says that when people do honor and respect him, he doesn't get happy, he doesn't get excited, right? Because if you allow your mind to get happy and excited when somebody's honoring and respecting you, that's a conditioned feeling. And when that condition changes, meaning now somebody is disrespectful to you, you'll be angry and you'll be sad and you'll be frustrated. So by training your mind to eliminate any craving, desire, attachments, when somebody does have respect for you, you might say, thank you, I appreciate your kindness, I appreciate your thoughtfulness, or whatever you say, but you don't need to allow your mind to get conditioned pleasant feelings. Therefore, your mind will be protected when somebody is disrespectful, because you're going to experience that. Even the Buddha, he experienced that. So you're going to experience people being disrespectful. So if every time somebody was disrespectful, if you got angry, then you're going to be angry a certain amount of time. And you would like to get to a point where you understand impermanence, that there's going to be some people who are polite, kind, friendly, and respectful, and there's going to be some people who are impolite, unkind, unfriendly, and disrespectful. This is the universal truth of impermanence. But if your mind is craving for everyone to be respectful, then you'll get happy when you get respect, and then you'll be disgruntled and agitated when you're disrespected. So you can just get rid of that craving through training your mind and realize that this is just all impermanence. And the person who's being disrespectful, it's harming them. It's not harming you. But if you allow your mind to form sadness and anger and frustration, now you're harming yourself. So this is a great teaching to see what the Buddha was experiencing during his lifetime, but it also helps you in your lifetime as well to understand how to interact when you're experiencing these things. And of course, you're going to need training of your mind. You can't just learn in a class like this and snap your finger and no longer get sad or frustrated. You're going to need to gradually train your mind with the entire path to enlightenment. So any questions on this chapter? Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So I'm going to move to the next chapter. If there's someone who would like to read this, looks like Yusuf would like to read. Okay, sir, if you'd like to read chapter 16, go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. Words that are just so not otherwise. From the night he fully awakened monks until the night he attains final nibbana, final enlightenment. In this interval, whatever he speaks, talks of, and explains, all that is just so, not otherwise. Therefore, he is called the Tathagata. As he speaks monks, so he does. As he does, so he speaks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. So here, this is actually spoken by one of the students of the Buddha right after he died. Because the Buddha knew 3 months before he was going to die that he was about to die, and he gave everyone a heads up. This was very wise. This is how smart he was, how intelligent he was, how enlightened he was, that he was aware of his own death 3 months ahead of time, and he gave people a heads up about that. And then he spoke his final words at the time of death, and then he died. And then after that, one of his students said this, that from the night that he fully awakened, meaning that from the moment he got to enlightenment, until the time that he died, that's what final enlightenment is that when an enlightened being is enlightened and they die, we don't call it death, we call it final enlightenment, because this is where the mind and the body are separating from each other. And now that's final enlightenment. Whatever he did during that time, from the age of 35 until the age of 80, whatever he speaks of and explains, this is the path to enlightenment. That's what he taught. He taught the path to enlightenment. And his students are acknowledging that he was very dedicated and committed to sharing the teachings that it takes to be able to get to enlightenment. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter, if any at all. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So we'll move on to the next chapter, which is chapter 17. It looks like Vibhav is volunteering. Go ahead, sir.
The Tathagata's speech. So too, Prince, such speech as a Tathagata knows to be untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial, and which is also unwelcome and disagreeable to others, such speech the Tathagata does not speak. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be true and correct but unbeneficial, and which is also unwelcome and disagreeable to others, such speech that the Tathagata does not speak. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be true, correct, and beneficial, but which is unwelcome and disagreeable to others, the Tathagata knows the time to use such speech. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial, but which is welcome and agreeable to others, such speech the Tathagata does not speak. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be true and correct, but unbeneficial, and which is welcome and agreeable to others, such speech the Tathagata does not speak. Such speech as the Tathagata knows to be true, correct, and beneficial, and which is welcome and agreeable to others, the Tathagata knows the time to use such speech. Why is that? Because the Tathagata has compassion for all beings.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So the teachings of the Buddha focus on speech at different times. The Eightfold Path that we just talked about, that's a first layer of purification where you're eliminating lying, slander, harsh speech, and frivolous speech. Then there's a deeper teaching called the 5 factors of well-spoken speech. And this is where you're learning to speak at the right time, what you say is true, gentle, beneficial, and with a mind of loving kindness. And the reason why you're doing this is because this is the natural laws of existence, that when you train your mind to speak this way, you'll experience improved results in all your relationships. You'll see that your relationships clear out and that you're not having any bitterness and harshness and hostility in your speech anymore. And then more and more, the people who are talking to you, they're not speaking that way either, because you always speak with the 5 factors of well-spoken speech. But then there's deeper level teachings on speech, and this is one of those, and the Buddha has some other ones as well. So here he's talking about his own speech, and he's saying, okay, if something is untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial, meaning it doesn't even meet the basic teachings of right speech and the 5 factors of well-spoken speech because it's untrue, it's incorrect, and unbeneficial. And then also that speech is going to be unwelcomed and disagreeable to others. then the Buddha says, I don't use that speech. I don't speak those words. Then if something was true and correct, but it was unbeneficial, once again, it's not meeting the basic threshold of right speech in the Eightfold Path and the 5 factors of well-spoken speech. And now here he says that it's unwelcomed and disagreeable to others. So in this case, he doesn't speak that, right? And then if something is true, correct, and beneficial, okay, so it's meeting the basic requirements of a portion of right speech in the Eightfold Path and the 5 factors of well-spoken speech. But now he says this speech is going to be unwelcomed and disagreeable to others. He says that he knows the time to use such speech. So he will say this because it's true, it's correct, and it's beneficial. But it's unwelcomed and disagreeable. So you're going to need to know the mind of the other person, and would it be wise to talk about this, right? So there might be something true, correct, and beneficial, but you need to know when's the right time. As soon as your life partner comes home from work and maybe they've had a pretty hectic day, maybe what you're about to say is unwelcomed and disagreeable. You're going to need to know the right time. Let them come in, put their bags down, get some food, relax, take off their shoes. And now maybe 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours later, that could be the right time to say this, right? So you're going to need to be observant of these kinds of things as you're practicing right speech. This is a deeper level of speech. Then he says, if something is untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial, of course, it's not meeting the basic threshold of the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, but it's welcomed and agreeable. He says, I don't speak that. So let's just say it's like profanity or something like that, where it's untrue, incorrect, and unbeneficial. But yet you're around people who welcome and they find that agreeable when you use profanity. The Buddha is saying, hey, I don't even use that. I don't even speak that way. Then he says, if there's something that's true and correct, but it's unbeneficial, this could also be maybe profanity or something like that, right? And it's welcomed and agreeable to others. He says, I don't speak that, right? Because it doesn't meet the basic threshold of being true, correct, and beneficial, which this next one, it does. Okay, it meets that basic threshold. And it's welcomed and agreeable to other people. But still here, he says the Tathagata knows the proper time to use the speech. Because let's just say something's true, correct, and beneficial. And let's say it's welcomed and agreeable. Maybe you're complimenting somebody. Well, if you were to compliment your employees or your children or your life partner excessively, this has the potential to arise conceit in their mind. And of course, they're responsible for their own conceit, but you probably don't enjoy being around people who are conceited and have a lot of ego. So you're going to need to know something that you're about to say. It could be true, correct, and beneficial, and it's welcomed and agreeable by this person. But you're still going to know, is this the proper time to actually say this? So this is really honing in on that first factor of the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, which is speaking at the proper time. Okay, and I teach the 5 factors of well-spoken speech whenever I teach the Eightfold Path. So if you guys have learned that with me, then you've seen me teach the 5 factors of well-spoken speech in detail. And we've talked about speaking at the proper time. But this is a level of detail that the Buddha is sharing with you, even deeper than what I've talked about in other classes and courses. So any questions here on this particular chapter? This is chapter 17 in volume 2. Okay, it looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Just as you explained many times before, this living with in this world with other folks who are not following the same factors of well-spoken speech, and you're between friends and family members, and there's a lot of like elevator talk or just, talk about random stuff. Like, what do you think about, how do you suggest we kind of handle that? Or is it okay to indulge in, family talk or friends talk? We're not doing the profanity and other thing, but just talking between friends, I guess.
Yeah, when the Buddha is talking about unbeneficial speech, he's not talking just about having common discussions and conversations. It's not like there's an approved list of topics of like, here's the things you should talk about and here's the things you shouldn't. When he's talking about unbeneficial, it would be like profanity or slander or gossip, or a frivolous speech where you're just talking unpurposeful, unbeneficial, where there isn't a real point or a real purpose behind the speech. So that's what he's talking about here when he's talking about unbeneficial speech. So if you're meeting someone for the first time and you need to talk to them and ask them questions like, where do you live? Where are you from? What kind of things do you enjoy doing? This is purposeful. This is beneficial because you're getting to know this person. You're establishing a relationship. So when you're in a household, there's going to be other people who are speaking in ways that are maybe unbeneficial, but that doesn't mean you need to do that. You can be very purposeful and focused in the conversation. And that's what it means to speak beneficially, not about the topic itself.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so I'm not seeing any other questions here. So we'll move on to the next chapter. And by the way, in this chapter, if you guys read this, you see the 5 factors of well-spoken speech, but I explain this in detail in the chapter 5 of volume 1. So this is chapter 18. It looks like Yusuf would like to read this. Go ahead, sir.
The Tathagata taught very few compared to numerous things he had known. On one occasion, the perfectly enlightened one was residing at Kozmabi in a Simisaba grove. Then the perfectly enlightened one took a few Simisaba leaves in his hand and addressed the monks thus: "What do you think, monks? Which is more numerous, these few Simisaba leaves that I have taken up in my hand, or those in the Simisaba grove overhead?" "Venerable Sir, the Simisaba leaves that the perfectly enlightened one has taken up in his hand are few, but those in the Simisaba grove overhead are numerous. So too, monks, the things I have directly known but have not taught you are numerous, while the things I have taught you are few. And why, monks, have I not taught those many things? Because they are unbeneficial, irrelevant to the fundamentals of the holy life, and do not lead to the fading away of strong feelings, to freedom from strong feelings, to elimination, to peace, to direct knowledge, experience, to enlightenment, to nibbana. Therefore I have not taught them. And what monks have I taught? I have taught, this is discontentedness. I have taught, this is the cause of discontentedness. I have taught, this is the elimination of discontentedness. I have taught, this is the way leading to the elimination of the...
Oh, looks like we lost you there, Yusuf. Your mute came on.
And why, monks, I have taught this? Because this is beneficial, relevant to the fundamental of the holy life, and leads to the fading away of strong feelings, to freedom from strong feelings, to elimination, to peace, to direct knowledge, experience, to enlightenment, to nibbana. Therefore, I have taught this.
Okay, thank you, sir. So when you see a simile like this and you see a story, it's really good to kind of imagine this in your mind and kind of put yourself in the shoes of these people, right? So here you've got the Buddha walking through a forest, and he's along with other monks, right? There's other people that are with him. And he reaches down and he picks up some leaves and holds them in his hands. And he says to his monks, what is more numerous, the few leaves that I've taken up in my hand, or all the leaves overhead in the jungle, in the forest? And of course, his students say, those few leaves that are in your hand are, almost insignificant compared to, all the leaves of overhead in the forest. They're so much more numerous in the forest. Well, then the Buddha says, so too, monks, the things I have directly known but have not taught to you are numerous, while the things I have taught you are few. So he taught the few leaves that are in his hands, because that's what leads to enlightenment. That's what he ultimately gets to. But he had wisdom of all those leaves, right? All those leaves overhead represent all the various wisdoms that he had from growing and developing over multiple lifetimes. But he only taught the few things that lead to enlightenment. And the collection of those things is in 45 volumes of books, right? Those are the few leaves that we still have available, right? So a Buddha, having gotten to enlightenment by themselves, without the help of any teachers or any guides, are going to have deep, deep, profound wisdom. And they're going to have wisdom about the path to enlightenment, inside and out, backwards and forwards. but they also have other knowledge and other wisdom about other things. But they choose not to share those things and teach those things because their only goal and their only interest is to help countless people get to enlightenment. So they only need to teach these few leaves that are in the hand. And that's what the Buddha is describing here, that he only teaches those things that lead to enlightenment. That's what he's talking about here. And then he says, okay, well, what have I taught? And here's, once again, he's pointing to the Four Noble Truths. That's the very beginning of the path to enlightenment. What is discontentedness, the cause of it, the elimination of it, and the path forward? You're going to see this over and over and over again because it's the very first teaching, the Four Noble Truths and establishing right view. So he's going to point to that multiple times. And the reason why he's taught this is because that's what leads to enlightenment. That's what leads to the elimination of discontent feelings. So any questions here on this chapter? This is chapter 18. The Tathagata taught very few compared to numerous things he had known. Yusuf, do you have a question or is your hand still up from before? Okay, maybe it's still up from before. Okay, I'm going to check to see if we have any other questions or anything that anybody would like to ask. I don't see anything anywhere. So let's move to the next chapter, which is chapter 19. If there's someone who would like to volunteer to read this is a very interesting simile. Okay, Vibhav, go ahead, sir.
Simile of a man were wounded by an arrow thickly smeared with poison. Suppose, Malun Kaputta, a man were wounded by an arrow thickly smeared with poison, and his friends and companions, his kinsmen and relatives, brought a surgeon to treat him. The man would say, I will not let the surgeon pull out this arrow until I know whether the man who wounded me was a noble or a Brahmin or a merchant or a worker. And he would say, I will not let the surgeon pull out the arrow until I know the name and clan of the man who wounded me, until I know whether the man who wounded me was tall or short or of middle height, until I know whether the man who wounded me was dark or brown or golden skinned, until I know whether the bowstring or the bowstring that wounded me was fiber or reed or sinew or hemp or bark, until I know whether the shaft that wounded me was wild or cultivated, until I know with what kind of feathers the shaft that wounded me was fitted, whether those of a vulture or a heron or a hawk or a peacock or a stork, until I know with what kind of a sinew the shaft that wounded me was bound, but whether that was that of an ox or a buffalo or a deer or a monkey, until I know what kind of arrowhead it was that wounded me, whether spiked or razor-tipped or curved or barbed or calf-toothed or lancet-shaped. And this would still not be known to the man, and meanwhile he would die. So too, Malun Kaputta, if anyone should say thus, I will not lead the holy life under the Enlightened One until the Enlightened One declares to me, the world is eternal, and the world is not eternal. The world is finite, and the world is infinite. The soul is the same as the body, and the soul is one thing, and the body is another. And after that, Tathagata exists, and after that, Tathagata does not exist. And after that, Tathagata both exists and does not exist. And after that, Tathagata neither exists or does not exist. That would still remain undeclared by the Tathagata, and meanwhile the person would die. Therefore, Malun Kaputta, remember that I have left undeclared as undeclared. Remember what I have declared as declared. And what have I left undeclared? The world is eternal. The world is not eternal. The world is finite, and the world is infinite. The soul is the same as the body, and the soul is one thing, and the body is another. And after death, a Tathagata exists, and after death, a Tathagata does not exist. And after death, a Tathagata both exists and does not exist. And after death, a Tathagata neither exists or does not exist. I have left undeclared. And what have I declared? This is discontentedness. This is the cause of discontentedness. This is the elimination of discontentedness. This is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. I have declared. And why have I declared that? Because it is beneficial. It belongs to the fundamentals of the holy life. It leads to liberation, to freedom from strong feelings, to elimination, to peace, to direct knowledge experience, to enlightenment, to nibbana. That is why I have declared it.
Okay, thank you, sir. So another simile that gives us a very vivid picture of what the Buddha is talking about here. He's talking to his student Meralankemputta, and this particular student, he's sharing with him, suppose there's this man, this person who's wounded by a poisonous arrow that's thickly smeared with this poison. And once the poisonous arrow has gone in, his friends and companions and relatives brought a surgeon to treat him. And here he is in the middle of the woods, right? Having been shot with his arrow. And he's like, hold on. Before you take this arrow out and you get this poison out of me, I need to know the answer to these things. He's not going to let the surgeon pull out the arrow until he knows all the answers to all these questions. Well, the Buddha says, surely this person would die before they would know the answer to all those questions. And the Buddha is saying the same thing, that if a new student comes to him and says, hey, declare all these things to me before I will actually learn and practice your teachings. Declare to me whether the world is eternal, the world is not eternal, the world is finite, the world is infinite, the soul is the same as the body, the soul is one thing and the body is another. After death, the Tathagata, or an enlightened being, exists. After death, a Tathagata does not exist. After death, a Tathagata both exists and does not exist. And after death, a Tathagata neither exists nor does not exist. He's saying that all of this would be undeclared, and meanwhile, that person would die. So if you understand the three poisons or the three unwholesome roots of craving, anger, and ignorance, you've been shot with this arrow. And if you're looking for the answer, to have all the answers to all your questions before you choose to start practicing the teachings, you're going to die before you get that poison out of your mind and you actually experience enlightenment. So you're going to need to learn and grow and develop and practice. And that's what's going to help lead to more and more wisdom as you're gradually developing and cultivating the mind on the path to enlightenment. But here, the Buddha is describing his undeclared teachings. These are his undeclared teachings, meaning he did not declare these teachings. He's left them as undeclared, and he's explaining to his students to be sure that they remember what he did not declare, that he did not teach these things. So he didn't teach whether the world is eternal, meaning it's going to last forever, or the world is not eternal, meaning it's going to end. That the world is finite or the world is infinite. He didn't teach these things. So if you ever hear somebody saying that the Buddha taught this, that, or the other thing related to these kinds of things, you can see it right here, back to the Pali Canon, that he didn't teach these things. He also didn't teach about a soul. The idea of a soul conflicts with the universal truth of impermanence and the universal truth of non-self. So he left it as an undeclared teaching. If you ever hear anybody talking about a soul related to the teachings of the Buddha, he never taught it because it's not independently verifiable. You can't tangibly touch a soul. You can't see a soul. You can't independently verify whether it actually exists or not. So he just left it as an undeclared teaching. Then he's talking about his death. And he's saying that he's not declaring whether he's going to exist after death or not exist. So for an enlightened being, he doesn't declare what comes next. He's talking about himself as the Tathagata, but you can relate this to any enlightened being, that he's not declaring what comes next for an enlightened being. So getting to enlightenment needs to happen without a craving and desire, attachment, or longing or yearning for some kind of afterlife. That's not what the Buddha is teaching you. The Buddha is teaching you to get to contentedness and peacefulness in the present moment, where your mind's not longing and yearning for something after this, but in the present moment, you can maintain your contentedness and your peacefulness and your joy. So if you ever hear anybody says that the Buddha taught that you don't exist after death, after you're enlightened, this isn't true. If you hear somebody talk about how after you get to enlightenment and you die, you're going to go to some brilliant place, this isn't true. The Buddha didn't declare this. And you'll see this on Facebook memes or Instagram memes. You'll see this all over the place in discussions and books and documentaries. You'll see it from people who maybe even have a very good reputation about sharing certain teachings. But here you can see the truth for yourself by learning with the original words of the Buddha that he didn't declare what comes next for an enlightened being. If you don't get to enlightenment, we know that there's rebirth. But in terms of what's next for an enlightened being, it doesn't even matter, because by the time you get to enlightenment, your mind is so peaceful and so joyful, it doesn't matter what's next. The teachings of the Buddha aren't about believing a bunch of things and then hoping something good happens when you die. It's about learning and practicing now in the present moment and getting to the peace and the joy now in the present moment. It's not about the future and worrying about what may or may not happen after death. So once the Buddha shares what is undeclared from his teachings, then he says, well, what did I declare? And of course, once again, he's going to point to the Four Noble Truths because that's the beginning of the path. And that's what's actually going to lead to enlightenment, which is what he shares here, the reason why he declared this. So let me know if you guys have any questions here. This is the simile of a man were wounded by an arrow thickly smeared with poison. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions. So we'll go to our last chapter for today, which is chapter 20. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Keely, go ahead, ma'am.
Instruction usually presented to his disciples. How does Master Gotama guide his disciples? And how is Master Gotama's instruction usually presented to his disciples? This is how I guide my disciples, given the Sana, and this is how my instruction is usually presented to my disciples. Monks, material form is impermanent. Feeling is impermanent. Perception is impermanent. Volitional formations, choices, decisions are impermanent. Consciousness is impermanent. Monks, material form is not self. Feeling is not self. Perception is not self. Volitional formations, choices, decisions are not self. Consciousness is not self. All formations are impermanent. All things are not self. That is the way I guide my disciples, and that is how my instruction is usually presented to my disciples. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Keely. So here, there's a couple things you can glean from this particular chapter. First, what the Buddha is teaching is that where does he start with helping people to understand the path to enlightenment? Is he starts with essentially the three universal truths, which is what I typically start with because that's what's leading to understanding the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths is the first teaching to get on the path to enlightenment, but you need to know the three universal truth of impermanence, discontentedness, and non-self in order to understand the Four Noble Truths. So the Buddha is saying that's what he starts with, is understanding that physical form is impermanent, that your feelings are impermanent, that perceptions, your views and opinions about the world, those are impermanent. Your volitional formations, your choices and decisions, they're impermanent. And the mind itself is impermanent. And the reason why this is so important is because the unenlightened mind craves permanence. It wants these things to be permanent. So if you have a certain material object and you're craving and longing, yearning and holding on to it, as long as you have it, you feel happy. But then when you lost it, when it gets broken, when you misplaced it, because the mind's craving permanence, this is why the mind becomes discontent. And the same thing's happening not just with physical form, but with feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness. A perception, as I mentioned, is this view or opinion. So if you've ever been in an argument about your political views or any other kind of opinions that you have, this is the mind clinging to your perceptions. You're craving permanence, wanting everybody to agree with your views and opinions. And you can just let go because everyone's not going to agree with you. That is impermanence, right? So the Buddha is saying this is where he starts. Okay, so this is the very first teaching that the Buddha is sharing, and this is how he presents the teaching to his students. Now, another thing that you can glean from a particular teaching like this, and you're going to see this throughout his teachings, is notice how a student asks a question, then the Buddha teaches, right? Sometimes when you're learning and practicing and you gain all this wisdom, you might feel like you want to push the teachings out on other people, maybe force them, right? You're not interested in that. The Buddha, he was already peaceful. He was already joyful, right? He didn't have to prove himself to anybody. He wasn't trying to coerce somebody into doing anything. He wasn't trying to convince somebody to do any particular thing. He was just sitting there, and if somebody asked him a question, of course, he answered that question. And then, of course, there were times where he had scheduled talks and scheduled discourses, but those people are choosing to come learn with him. So a person who's wise they're not going to go around and try to force other people to learn and understand what it is that they know. So if you find yourself trying to convince other people or coerce other people or force people to do certain things, this isn't going to produce beneficial results in your life because it's coming from craving, desire, attachment. And you can use the example of the Buddha where you can see that he just, as soon as somebody asks a question, okay, you would like to know that? Here's the answer. And he does that repetitively in his teachings. And as I mentioned, sometimes he just starts teaching, like the Eightfold Path. That would have been a talk, a scheduled talk where people were coming to learn, and he would just say, here's the Eightfold Path, and this is what you need to know. But more often than not, it's people asking him questions like this. So let me know if you guys have any questions on this chapter. This is the last one for today, chapter 20, instruction usually presented to his disciples. You can ask questions through Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. All right, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So what I'm going to do is just end by thanking all of you guys for joining for today's class. Thank you for those of you guys that read. Thank you for all the questions, and thank you for even reading. If you're reading before and or after class, it's wonderful to have a community of people that are learning and growing together, understanding the teachings, investigating the teachings. If you remember back to one of last week's chapters where the Buddha talked about a community that's trained in investigation, not in conceited talk, that you investigate the teachings and examine them instead of just mere poetry. Because as you can see, his teachings aren't poetry. He's explaining to you the natural laws of existence, and then that's where you learn them, reflect on them, and then practice them to be able to train your mind. So thank you guys for reading. Thank you for investigating the teachings. Thank you for asking questions. Thank you for deciding that today's a day that you'd like to learn and practice the teachings of the Buddha. So next week on Saturday, we're going to be in chapters 21 through 30. So you can read those before, after class, and then we're going to get together like this at 9 a.m. on Saturday morning and 9 p.m. Saturday night, Thai time, and I'll share the teachings with you guys. And you guys are welcome to join either one of those classes, or you can watch the replay either on Facebook, YouTube, or on our podcast. And remember, these books are available on our website at no cost. You can download it at buddhadailywisdom.com. You can take it and go print it. You can order printed versions on Amazon, or you can pick these up at the temple here in Chiang Mai. So if you'd like to join for tomorrow's class, which is the group learning program, we're going to be in chapter 15 of the first book of volume 1. Chapter 15 is titled True Love, Love Without Attachment. This is the very first book of the book series, and this particular chapter is excellent if you're finding it to be challenging in your relationships. If you're finding bitterness and hostility either from yourself or from other people, you're going to need to understand what true love is in order to be able to practice it, and then to be able to experience it coming back to you, and to be able to identify it when it is coming back to you. So I'm going to be teaching that tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. So again, thank you all for joining, and perhaps we'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. Take care. Sawadee ka. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.